Good morning, everybody. Oh, I gotta turn my lights on here. It's Saturday morning. I wasn't gonna do a video, but I wrote a little bit of a brief, starting on like the next post. I don't know if I'll even post that because it already happened. It was a politics thing. I said, as I watch all the things that we're doing, U.S., things that go on in the world, I said in the little writing, maybe I'll post it, I said, what's going to happen? Last week, President Obama, justified our actions in Syria. A 60-something nation coalition joined for Russia to join our coalition. So our bombing campaign in Syria was considered justified. Why is it important that we really knew it was a legitimate strategy that was justified? Why is that important? Because it involved the killing of people. And when a country, any country, decides to kill other people because of various reasons that you justify it, you need to make sure you're not just doing that as saying it as a political spin. Now, I knew our bombing campaign in Syria was a political spin. I knew that. How did you know? Because it was said openly in the media. Because initially the problem in Syria with all of the ISIS that were attacking Assad attacking ISIS. A few years ago, some political people, some people in the president's administration, including Hillary Clinton, said we need to go in and do something, back up the rebels, help the rebels, not the non-ISIS rebels, help them mount a campaign against Assad, and because it's a civil war. Well, when people said that, President Obama said publicly, that is a doomed strategy, which I agreed, because these so-called freedom fighters, those that are rising up against Assad, but they're not radical ISIS groups, which would be very hard to distinguish. But the president said, they're just doctors, lawyers, or whatever. They're not a fighting force, and there's no way we'd be able to mount up from out of thin air some Syria freedom fighters that are not involved with ISIS. They're going to beat Al-Qaeda, because if you're going to raise up a force like that, they're going to have to fight off ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and they're going to have to win, and they're going to have to topple the leader of Syria, who is Assad. They're going to have to also beat ISIS and Al-Qaeda, clear them out of the land, and then they're going to have to establish some type of a democracy, which is impossible. Actual armies of countries that we were backing up, Iraq or others, couldn't fight them off. So the president said that strategy would never work. Well, that's a strategy he decided to do when he said we're going to go in, and that's the strategy that the president defended before the UN a few weeks ago when he said, come join our coalition because Russia's strategy has failed. Okay. So I wrote in the little post 2 days ago, thinking I'll start working on it. I said, what's going to happen, I might leave it on, I might not. I don't know if I want to write a whole post. I said, but what's going to happen is the U.S. is going to someday rethink its strategy and say, well, maybe it's not working the way we thought. I said, and the reason we're going to probably say that is because Russia has gone in, and when they launched those rockets from the Caspian Sea, from their naval ships, those rockets traveled almost 1,000 miles and hit targets in Syria. And those rockets were flying and are flying right in airspace where our planes are flying. When Russia did that, they let us know in no uncertain terms, if you don't clear out of this area, and something happens, we're going to have a war with you. That's what they know. Behind the scenes talks, I know that they've been discussing that. Now, yesterday I saw in the news, Ash Carter, the defense guy, said we are no longer going to keep our strategy in Syria. The strategy of supporting the rebels and all, and the big strategy that the president just defended before the world a week ago, and said, this is the strategy, join a coalition, Putin's strategy is fair. That whole strategy, now we have said, we're rethinking it, it's not working. But I said in the post that I wrote the day before this announcement was made, I said, you watch, the U.S. is going to say, we're no longer going to support the rebels. Why? Because if we kept that strategy, and Russia's basically said, no, this is what we're doing, we were going to head into war with them. And so this was a quick way for us to get out of that before we had to defend and look bad by Russia killing these rebel groups, which are named the Free Syrian Army. So I was just upset because in our country we do politics. We do politics. We make political decisions in this country. And they're not done out of the sincere belief that a certain thing is right. They're simply done for, well, it'll make us look bad if we don't do a certain thing. It's going to... And when those decisions are made and they involve the death of people, you have to make sure you're doing them because you think they're a just, righteous act. You don't do them because you think politically it's the best thing to do. And that's proof that that's why we were doing that, okay? So listening to some Christian music. I have a couple of posts. I'm going to post this today. I don't think I'll post the writing with it. But that's what I was writing, what I just mentioned. I listened to Christian music. I got up at 1 today. And I listened for about an hour. And I couldn't listen no more. I sat in the tub in the morning and then I pray. And just about every song was, I can't make it, it's a struggle. And I thought after 50 years of the Christian experience, or however long those songs are going on, I don't even know if that's a viable message to give to people. That it's going to be an uphill, downhill, uphill, back and forth. If there is not some purpose beyond that, for you as a Christian, for you as a believer, if there is not a mission or a purpose beyond, tell me why I can't make it, this is what the song was. And I'm going to try, and I'm going to, and I'm not, there's a couple of Christian stations you can listen to here, and I'll switch them over back and forth on the radio. And I just thought, I don't know if that, get a mission. Get a mission. Why? And I'm not saying get ISIS mission, I'm saying get a mission in your life. Why does radical ISIS attract so many young Muslim people? Because they had a lot of grievances for many, many years of the way things were going in their part of the world, the way our involvement is in those things. And it finally attracted them because it says, now we're doing something. I don't justify ISIS. But it gave them something else than this thing about, sitting, waiting, feeling oppressed. It's going to get better after 50 years, and then you're going to go up and down in the whole 90 years and then someday die. It gave them something different. That's what attracted them. It said, now you can take up a revolution. Obviously, I don't advocate violent revolutions. But that's what it did to them. And they said, now we're going to be a part of something. And on a world stage, just that one thing I just mentioned, I was going to do Acts, chapter 2, but I could go through, I could read my normal reading. Acts 2 is a very good chapter. There's a couple of more prophecies from Psalms, from Joel. All of these things you could read. You can read and study. And as Christians, where we live in this part of our lives, I saw some of my friends this past week and went up to Timmins just with the mission for one day to see the guys. I saw a lot of them live their lives in addiction, meth, alcohol, drugs. One of them beat up one of the other guys. I saw one of my friends. One of the guys was hanging out under the overpass the other day. His name is Lance. They call him Tweaking Lance. I have another friend named Lance, but this Lance kind of acts nuts. He was under the underpass and just like standing there, not begging for money or anything. And I just happened to stop at the light. I don't know him that well, but he was just sitting there. I said, I'm sitting here. I said, Lance, you want a cigarette? He said, no, I got some. Surprised that you usually take it. Then I was at the mission. One of the girls showed me on her phone an arrest or a warrant because somebody had beat Lance up, beat him up unconscious. I know the friend that beat him up because I read the story and said, well, he did it to him, and she called the cops. The cops came up to Timmins and drove through the parking lot. The guy they were looking for was sitting inside. Sometimes the cops come inside and get the guys, but he was in there. They didn't go into Timmins, but they did drive around the parking lot. If they went in Timmins, they would have arrested him. Maybe they didn't want to go through the arrest. Everybody knew he was there. He knew he was in there, sitting inside. I'm not advocating they should have, whatever they wanted to do, I don't care. I just sing. I don't know if these feeding missions are doing any good. You're enabling many of the guys that are waking up, getting high, breaking in. Somebody just broke into, I saw in the local news, I don't know who this was, but he broke into the boat store here, broke the glass. I saw it 2 days ago on my computer on the local news. Stole a cooler. Looks like I might have recognized him. He had a banana on, but all of these guys that have been doing all of these things for all of these years, then they show up and they get food and it gives them energy, and then they're out doing it again. The feeding missions need to be focused on life change. A lot of people were upset, obviously, that our friend Don died 2 weeks ago. Severe alcoholic. Some of the other guys beat Don up. They don't know if it was, somebody said the cause of death was the beating. No arrest test. I don't know what's going on with that. If we don't focus on something more, then let's just give them a free meal. Let's just feed them. They're going to go out, they're going to rob, they're going to get drunk, they're going to get high, they're going to... It says in the New Testament, if any man does not work, neither should he eat. Why is it that strict? Because you as a man, as a person, you have a certain amount of energy in you. A certain amount of, Jesus said there are 12 hours in the day. And if a man walks during the day, he will not stumble, because he is the light of this world. You were created to function as much as possible, to have a job, to be functional. And many of these guys are on disability for mental issues or depression. The checks are going to drugs. Many of them are living dysfunctional lives. And it's not a benefit if they had to work to eat. As cruel as that sounds, it would take that energy that's used for addiction, for breaking into boat stores, for all these other things, beating each other up, knocking this one unconscious. It would take all that energy and it would then focus it on a productive thing. Then they would have money to buy food to eat. And also that energy would not, the food that they're getting for free, and make people mean well in these feeding missions, it's giving them the extra energy normally the pattern is to go out and finish your day working, but they have all that energy, they're not working, so it's to go out and commit a crime, to get high, to do meth. So the feeding ministries have to recognize whether or not they're really accomplishing something. And I saw the guys, I went up to the Timmins, the mission, just one day the other day, and all of the same, not everybody there is in that situation, but 80-something%. And so you got to ask yourself, is that just enabling them to do these things? And if so, is that helping them? And if it's not helping them, and it just makes you feel good to be engaged in feeding, it is a good feeling to share and to give. But if it's actually not helping, then you got to question whether you're just doing that because it gives you something to do to help the homeless and to feed them, or if you're doing that because you really want to benefit those people. So this is a little clip. Very early I got up. I don't want to do a whole teaching thing on, regular. We could go through Acts. I was going to do Acts chapter 2, and I was going to do a few other things. But I want to focus you. I want to encourage you. Listening to all those songs for about maybe 40 minutes or so. One after the other after the other. I'm going to make it. Why is it like this? Why is it like that? If that's the message we're given. And a lot of them were about surrender. Surrender, let me say, I had a book on recovery I read a few years ago. I don't have that book. And it was by kind of like what you would call a rationalist. These were some that believed in recovery, or believed that the focus on all of the surrendering and giving in, and we got to just, they believed that was not the route to go. Karl Marx and others believed, Voltaire, maybe I'll teach for a second. Voltaire, oftentimes you hear Voltaire as an atheist when we discuss thinkers and philosophers. But Voltaire was not an atheist. But after the Enlightenment, you had a great revolution take place within society. Right at the end of the Middle Ages, the period where we're getting into the Renaissance, then the Reformation, the Scientific Revolution, the Age of Enlightenment. There was a great, hope that people had that we're advancing, we're scientific advances, industrial revolution, all this period, between the 1300s up to the 1800s of world history. But Voltaire, like others, they were anti-church, anti-tradition, but Voltaire was not anti-God, and that's a mistake. Some think he was almost like in the category of, a Kierkegaard, 19th century father of existentialism, Kierkegaard, Christian, Søren Kierkegaard, the Danish gadfly. But what they felt was much of the traditional church, and I'm not anti-traditional church, but they were giving an impression to humanity of surrender, accept the struggles, accept every day is going to be a struggle every day. And they said you've demasculated any ability for man to rise up over these oppressive monarchies and authorities. And so in the mind of Marx and others, they said communism to them, though it was a failed system, tried and failed, but yet to them it was somehow a belief that you finally empower the common man. And so there was that aspect of hope that we were finally going to get beyond all of this, the book on the book on recovery, I forget the name of it, The Addicted Voice. that they focused on the addictive voice. It was on recovery from substance abuse and alcoholism. And they basically taught that, and they didn't use surrender. They were the man who wrote it, I think it was an ex-Navy guy, but it's a whole program that was sort of like a counter to AA. And the reason he wrote that book, he didn't like the Christian ideas that were embedded in AA, of surrender, of, he said, it's sort of like I'm showing you, the Voltaire and the Marxists, they said that, that aspect, we got to empower people to do something besides living your life, and I'm going to surrender today, I'm going to sever today, I'm going to show. So he taught on recovery from that other perspective, and he said, forget about, and he also, I remember it was funny, I almost have 3 years, I have not relapsed, but he said, in his book, he said, and who cares if you got 3 years sober or 5 years, he said, just be sober. No one else is supposed to pat you on the back for that. I kind of liked the book. I think he was an ex-Navy, guy. Got tired of drinking, being alcoholic, tried the AA, and he didn't like the aspect of it that was surrender. And the thing that got me mad, I went listening to the Christian music for about 40 minutes today. I do believe it's important for us to say there's a greater purpose. I look at all my friends I mentioned, all the street guys I just saw the other day. There's a greater purpose to your life than that. Some of the girls even, some of the ladies, 50 years old, going up, walking the street, going to eat Timmins. I know they're getting high, I know they're doing meth, I know they're getting drunk. That whole scene has to change. And many of them are walking through the streets here. I love all my friends. And then they're heading up that way, and they're going to go, and they're going to leave, and they're going to walk down, and people call the cops because this guy's in the middle of the street. All of that has to change. All of that has to change. None of that is acceptable. None of that is acceptable. They have to begin having responsible lifestyles. And if we love all these people like we say we love them, and I do love them, then we can't pretend everything is just okay, because it's not. I just want to talk a little today. I wanted you to see that Russia thing. And I had just wrote, I said, watch, we're going to change our strategy in Syria. Because we realize Russia is heading towards a confrontation with us. And the fact that they launched those missiles from the Caspian Sea, some supposedly went into Iraq by accident, but they hit in Syria, they hit the rebel bases, and those missiles, and it was also reported this week that 2 U.S. planes diverted course over the airs of Syria because Russian planes were going to head in their path. And it's also reported that they were intercepting U.S. drones over the air. They're going to create a no-fly zone. That's what I was saying. They're the ones that are going to establish Assad and then say, now you got a no-fly zone. U.S., you don't be flying over here anymore. My little cat just came in. So, it was going to be Acts 2. It's a good chapter if you want. Go read the chapter, Peter. The promise of the Spirit came. Jesus in Acts chapter 1 said that they had to wait for the promise of the Father. And it was on the day of Pentecost, which was one of the 3 major feasts that Israel had. And it came 50 days after Passover. It's Feast of Harvest. Feast of First Fruits is referred to different ways. And it was a fulfillment that the Spirit would come upon the church. They spoke in tongues, other languages, as the Spirit gave them utterance. And it said, it appeared unto the apostles and the disciples, cloven tongues of fire on top of their heads. That was the miracle, and the sound of rushing mighty wind came. Why was it tongues of fire? not ears, noses, because everything that they were going to be speaking from that time forth was going to start a revolution in the earth. It's the gospel, the message that will go forth. And Peter quotes, I gave you in the Acts chapter 1, the first quote from the Psalms that Peter saw as being fulfilled. In Acts 2 you have a few more. Joel chapter 2, because all of the people that were gathered there for the feast at Jerusalem from the different areas, they witnessed the outpouring of the Holy Spirit upon the church. They witnessed them speaking in tongues. And they said, we all hear them speak in our own dialects. And how are these guys able to speak in our languages, our dialects? Are they drunk? Peter says, no, it's too early for them to be drunk. Too early in the day. But this is that which was spoken by the prophet Joel. It goes all the way to the Old Testament prophet Joel chapter 2. In the last days, I'll pour out my spirit on all flesh. Your sons and your daughters will prophesy. Your young men will dream dreams. Your old men will see visions. I'll pour out my spirit on the headmaidens. And then there'll be judgment, sun, moon. It's interesting. Peter quotes that prophecy from Joel 2. And he says, this is that which was spoken in the last days. Let me tell you, in the New Testament, the last days are the period from the time right then, 2,000 years ago, to our time. Okay? The New Testament speaks about that. How could the New Testament, John, Peter in that verse, be saying that was the last days? Because it's not only the last days in the way we often think of nuclear war and all that. It's the last days in the new covenant age, the fulfillment age. Everything was heading towards where we're at, even what they received in that first century, the fulfillment of the promise of Christ. So the last days, and John says it in his letters, you have heard that Antichrist will come, and even now he is here. John wrote that also in the first century. So there is a last days of fulfillment. In the scripture, when it says the end of the world in the Gospels, it's also the end of the age. So there was closing of the Old Covenant, Old Testament age, and there was a coming of the new kingdom age, which Jesus brought to us. And there's a lot that we can do on, I mentioned the verse in Acts chapter 1, where they said, will you restore to us the kingdom at this time? I mentioned it in the last video. He said, it's not for you to know the times and the seasons, which God's put in his own power. And we could begin seeing that they're going to have a new understanding of what it means to be the people of God, what it means to be in this new covenant that they were in, that we are in, and that it was a new age. The new time began. The covenant was established. So I didn't really teach it, but Peter did say that the prophecy was fulfilled, that in the last days God will pour out his Spirit. And so that was a last days prophecy. And there are things in that prophecy he quoted from Joel 2 that'll still come to pass. But it's all, we're at that time. We're at that time. So I think I did about 30 minutes. It's very early today. Hot. That's it. I don't have no notes. I don't think I have any notes. They're in my bag there. I want to end with, I like giving this blessing each time I end. I put it up there a while ago. See it? The Lord bless thee and keep thee. The Lord make his face shine upon thee and be gracious unto thee. The Lord lift up his countenance upon thee and give thee peace. God bless everybody.